Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Sean Godar. I'm Vice President of Strategy and Analytics at Employers Health and Co-Director of Right Direction. I will serve as a moderator of this event. We are very excited to hear from today's speakers, but before we begin, a few housekeeping items. We've been using the new On24 webinar platform for a few months now, so hopefully you've had the opportunity to use it before today. We're always trying to improve user experience, so if you have feedback on how we can make it better, please let us know. You can rearrange your webinar console by minimizing the widgets, making them smaller or larger, and accessing new widgets at the bottom of your console. Currently, all attendees are in listen-only mode. Please use the Q&A function on the left-hand side of your console to submit any questions regarding the presentation, and I will address them at the end of the presentation. Watch for the recording to arrive via email tomorrow. Today, we will be talking with special guests about understanding the needs of caregivers. Our talk is sponsored by Families for Depression Awareness and Right Direction, a free mental health initiative developed by the partnership between the Employers Health and the American Psychiatric Association Foundation's Center for Workplace Mental Health. Right Direction is focused on raising mental health awareness, reducing stigma, and facilitating help seeking in the workplace. Now I will turn it over to Darcy Gruttadaro, Director of the Center for Workplace Mental Health at the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, and my fellow co-director of Right Direction.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sean, and thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to be bringing us voices of lived experience, which is so critically important in the work that all of us do. As Sean said, we are co-sponsoring this event with Families for Depression Awareness, and I am so pleased to introduce the co-moderator, Susan Weinstein, the co-executive director of Families for Depression Awareness. And Families for Depression Awareness is a high-impact organization that works on a number of different issues, including understanding the critical role that families play in supporting loved ones on the path to mental wellness. We are pleased to be co-moderating this and to bring you the voices from those families involved with Families for Depression Awareness. So I am now going to turn it over to Susan so that she can introduce our two panelists, and then we will engage in Q&A and a discussion with our panelists. Susan?
Thanks so much, Darcy. I'm so glad that we finally have a chance to work together. You know, COVID and all of that aside, we're finally here. So thank you. And we're really thrilled to be able to bring the voices of caregivers to the conversation. It's a lot easier for employers to conceptualize what's happening with their employees when they're the ones who are needing to take time off or needing accommodations or whatever. So we're grateful for the opportunity for them to hear from caregivers. And Families for Depression Awareness is very fortunate to have these two amazing volunteers to talk with us today. Helena Marzoium works in the Office of Population Health and Ambulatory Care Operations at NYC Health and Hospitals, the largest public health system in the United States. She volunteers for Families for Depression Awareness by participating in the Family Caregiver Advisory Panel, sharing insights from her experience. Helena obtained her master's in public health from the Dartmouth Institute for Health Policy and Clinical Practice at Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine. Nancy Sharvey is a physical therapist who specializes in the psychosocial aspects of healthcare and social justice issues. After more than 20 years, Nancy retired from teaching at Northeastern University. She's the parent of 3 adult children, 2 of whom have bipolar disorder. She cared for them while working full-time and could not have done so without the unconditional support of her employer. So you're going to hear good news. She's an active volunteer for Families for Depression Awareness and other mental health nonprofits, and an advocate for the needs of people who live with mental health issues and their loved ones. So welcome, you two. Thank you so much for being here. I'll get us started with the questions. And Helena, I'm going to go to you first. How did serving as a caregiver for your loved one with a mental health issue impact your work?
Yes. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this discussion. To answer the question, I would say that it definitely informs the way I interact with people. Just because you're in a professional setting, it doesn't mean you can't have empathy, patience, understanding if your colleagues happen to be going through something. So in my experience, this approach has actually helped foster meaningful relationships in the workplace, where we see each other as humans who care about people and things outside of work. And it creates a more holistic sense of being on the same team with your colleagues, and kind of fighting for each other with different things that you're advocating for. I know we spend a lot of time in the workplace, and I think one easy way to find support from your colleagues with whatever you're going through is to also give that support to them as well. So while it doesn't inform the material I work on in my current position, it definitely makes a huge difference in how I interact with people in the workplace, and as a result, how they interact with me.
That's great. So it's really been a life lesson.
Yes. Yeah. Not just for the workplace, but general relationships. But you kind of forget about that in the workplace.
Not siloing so much. So Nancy, how about you? How did serving as a caregiver impact your work?
Well, it affected my work in two ways. So I have two bipolar children. My daughter, who's my oldest, was difficult from literally the day she was born, which is one sort of way bipolar manifests itself. So from the day I went back to work when she was 6 months old, I picked every single job based on her needs. So I knew she was difficult, and I knew there's going to be crises in her life, and I picked every single job based on that. So I want to start out there. I absolutely, positively want to reinforce what Helena said. Having a child or two with bipolar absolutely transformed my life, and I could not have done my job as I did it without these two children. I did things like pick a student up off a clinical site and drive her to an ER because she was having depression issues. I had more than one student in my office, and I pulled up the Families with Depression Awareness website, and I read off the symptoms, and I said, does this sound like you? And I go, oh, yeah. But beside that, as Helena said, I just was so much more intuitive and caring and nurturing on the work site than I ever would have been. And I have to say, this might sound odd, but having two children with bipolar advanced my career tremendously because I found a niche. I am not shy about admitting what's going on in my life, and I found other people had these needs, but it weren't being addressed. So I became a national advocate. I present nationally. My publications have been read internationally, and so I found this niche that really, my career moved into this niche. And I was able to really be a leader in this niche because nobody else had identified it before. So it actually enhanced my career.
But I think in addition to that, also, being out there and doing those presentations and talking openly about your kids and raising the point with people that, the students or whoever else you were working with, that's also really important in terms of addressing stigma.
Oh, yeah. So I taught psychosocial aspects of illness. And every year when I taught the course, I would read a quote from somebody who'd written a book, and he had some of my quotes in his book, and I would read this quote, and other students would be silent, and I would say, that's my quote, and that's my child. And there would just be this silence in the room. And that was my anti-stigma campaign. That was my child, and that was my experience. And then we'd move on and talk about the sort of nuts and bolts of mental illness and stuff. But so, yeah, that was my mental illness. That was my stigma, my anti-stigma message. And it was very powerful.
It is very powerful. And, just being open about being a caregiver, about having someone you love struggling with a mental health issue, all that helps. And as Helena was saying, it humanizes the workplace. All right, let me give you another question. How did your coworkers and or managers support you in your role as a caregiver? Let's do Nancy first.
Well, again, I worked in a physical therapy department, so people were used to being nurturing and caring. And except for one instance, one time, my coworkers were fabulous. And if I needed to change my schedule, if I needed to change a class, they were there for me the whole time. They were just wonderful. And I don't know if there was stigma or not, because I don't think anybody would dare to say anything to me. But I never experienced stigma that I'm aware of. Maybe it was there, but several of my coworkers actually told me that they had loved ones with mental illness, which was nice. But the biggest thing was at one point I got really depressed. I mean, really depressed. And I decided I needed to take time off from work. And my manager was incredibly supportive about this. And I have a 9-month contract, and I always worked in the summer. It was a requirement for me to work in the summer. And HR didn't want to pay me for my time off. And my supervisor went to bat with them, and she got me paid for that time off that I took when I got depressed myself.
That's great to have the advocacy within your department.
Yeah, and like I say, I never experienced, well, there was one incident one time, and that was a really communication issue that somebody got upset with me about walking out. I walked out of a meeting. Well, it wasn't even a meeting. It was a student interaction that I walked out of because the hospital said, you need to be here. And of course I go there, and I waited an hour to see people, and I was really mad at them. And they said, well, we were busy. And I said, yeah, well, so was I. And they were like, but only that one time there was ever any issues about walking out of anything or changing anything.
And Helena, how about you? What kind of support did you get?
Yeah, I would definitely second what Nancy said about people in healthcare in general being a bit more understanding and supportive. I've worked in various industries, and in my current role, I don't have really many complaints about my employer and team. So I definitely, that's something that I don't take for granted, and I think it impacts how supportive you feel in your day-to-day. But a bit more specifically, I think it's reflected in the flexibility that you get in terms of how you get your work done, and not being micromanaged. If there's a word that's the opposite for micromanaging, than that. So, you know, my colleagues don't need to know everything that pertains to my role as a caregiver. I'm well aware that it's not their responsibility to offer emotional support or try to understand the intricacies. And on that note, I do tend to be more on the private side of keeping things about my specific situation private, not just for my sense of safety, but also to respect the privacy of my family members. Until I feel safe to share, or as comfortable as I feel sharing. So really from my team, my expectations or how I feel supported is just having that flexibility and understanding, them having faith that I will get my work done. Some days it might be a bit skewed or a different schedule, but if I committed to something, I'll get it done. And if there are any changes, trusting that I'll communicate in a timely manner, and them kind of knowing that, this is what's going on, and not kind of making it a recurring or something where they're keeping track of how many times that's happened. That's what I would say.
Great. Darcy, you want to hop in?
Sure. And I want to just reinforce some of what's already been shared. I think Helena gave some excellent examples and some key words around empathy, compassion, understanding. I think there's a lot of, that understanding and support from colleagues. There's been a lot of focus on burnout. And one thing we know when it comes to tackling burnout is creating a sense of community and a sense of belonging is really important, so that people, because we spend so much of our days at work and so much of our time at work. So what you described is really ideally what many workplaces are striving to achieve, because what we know with retention and the Great Resignation is that people are leaving their workplaces, and they tend to do so when they don't feel that sense of community and belonging. So I just really wanted to echo your description, because I think it was so well said. And it's really impressive that you had that kind of reaction from your colleagues, because that's really what makes all the difference. So I just wanted to echo that, but that's not my question. I think that was such a great explanation. And And also to hear Nancy describe a supportive workplace just makes all the difference. Again, we know during COVID, people woke up and really thought about, how do I feel about where I work? How do I feel about where I spend my days? Is this a healthy place for me? And I mentioned before we went live that I spent 17 years at NAMI. So I know many people don't necessarily feel safe coming to the workplace and sharing that their loved one, that they're serving as a caregiver for someone with a mental health condition, out of fear that their colleagues or bosses or whomever will lack confidence in their ability to kind of hack the hard work because they may be, you know, seriously impacted by the ups and downs that come with serving as a caregiver. So I just know that safety, that word safety, and feeling psychologically safe, sharing is such an important part of serving as a caregiver, because if you have to hide all that, it just puts added stress. And caregivers, certainly caregivers of those with mental health conditions, can really experience high levels of stress. We know that from studies. So now I'll get to my question. I was kind of excited to weigh in because what you're saying is so critically important for employers to hear around what are the key elements. And we know mental health conditions impact 20% of the population. And with those individuals come a whole array of caregivers. And they are coming to work, and if they're highly distracted, their productivity and performance can be impacted. But when they're supported and feeling like the workplace understands, it's a whole different ballgame. So let me pivot to my question. And you've kind of touched on this, both of you. I'm going to start with Nancy, but really kind of drilling in on what workplace policies and practices did you really find most helpful? And you've touched a little bit about some of these around flexibility and not micromanaging, but were there specific maybe leave policies, maybe benefits, Nancy, first, that you found really helpful and supportive?
Well, I would like to give a big shout out to all the employers out there that the number one thing that was most helpful to me was good health insurance. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I worked for Northeastern. At the time, they had 2 Blue Cross policies. And knowing what I knew about illness, I picked the most expensive one because I knew. And thank you, God, I did that because we needed every bit of it. And when my daughter first got sick, I really was pretty ignorant about a lot of things. And there was some times when Blue Cross wasn't doing what I thought they should do. And besides spending my time taking care of her and taking care of my work and getting my job done effectively, I didn't also need to be fighting with insurance companies, which I spent a lot of time doing. So I went to HR and I said, I don't think this is the way you want the insurance company to be treating me. And they said, you're right. And HR called Blue Cross and they negotiated on my behalf, and they got a case manager for my daughter. I mean, what a gift. What a gift. So I have to say the number one thing that you can offer is health insurance, policy-wise. And to really reinforce what Helena said, flexibility. That, and I would agree about nobody micromanaged me ever. You know, I get the work done. I could get at work at 2:00 in the morning. I could get it done at home. I could get it done in the classroom. As long as I was in the classroom and at meetings I needed to be at, they didn't care where I was or what I was doing, as long as I accomplished the task. And I think that's what I really want to stress, that you value achieving the task more than you value FaceTime or more than you value meeting certain recommendations. And again, my coworkers were just fantastic. I never had any, again, except for one little interaction one time, there was never any difficulty, and they were all very nurturing and very supportive of what it was that I might need.
Excellent. Excellent. And so, Helena, how about you in terms of policies? I know you've shared some already, policies and practices that were helpful.
So this might sound like, well, for me, this was an easy answer, but the working from home option is definitely something. I don't know if that's what you were thinking about in terms of a policy or practice, but for me, that has made a world of a difference from the perspective of caring for another person's well-being. Everyone here knows that if you yourself are stretched thin and feel depleted, you're struggling to manage all of the responsibilities on your plate, you can't show up as well for the person that you're caring for. So for me, the ability to work from home, which I know is a privilege and that not everybody has, so I definitely don't take it for granted, but that is the thing that has made the biggest difference for me as a caregiver, just to kind of make sure that I can get everything done, not specifically work related, and it doesn't spill over into the rest of the day. So I'm definitely part of that team with the resistance to go back to the office. It's nice seeing your coworkers, and there's definitely something to be said for being there in person in terms of maintaining those relationships and friendships. But definitely work from home, I think, has been great just in terms of your sense of, not feeling like you have to be in multiple places at the same time.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Sure.
And I totally agree with everything Helena said, and I definitely did some work from home. But for me, going to work was a gift, was a blessing, because I learned to compartmentalize my life, and I was really good at it. And when I was at work, I was at work. And when I was at home, I was at home. So for me, going to work was a gift. I felt confident. I felt capable. I felt reinforced. I felt valued. I could accomplish things. I could get things done. And I'd go home and there was another story. So I just want to give a counterpoint to that for me, and again, I did do some work from home, but I really valued going to work and being away from what was going on at home.
Yeah, I think that the takeaway for me on the different experiences you had is that it's really important to understand the needs of your employees at the point in time at which they are, when they serve as caregivers. So there certainly will be those people who really value being at home and working remotely at a certain stage in the life of their experience as a caregiver, right? But having that having the confidence of your employer, assuming your job is conducive to working from home and working remotely, but having this option and having your employer recognize that's important in your caregiver role to the needs of the person you're caregiving for is really important. That makes a statement unto itself. And then for you, Nancy, it's great that you felt like you needed to be at work, that was really gratifying to you, and you needed that to be a place where things were different for you. And I think that's really important too. So this whole idea of flexibility, this whole idea of employers recognizing when they can, not everyone can work remotely, but giving people choice and options is really important too. And I also wanted to point out, Nancy, I really love what you described, which is you had a health insurance plan, it wasn't meeting your needs, and so you went to your HR department or your benefits lead and said, we're not having our needs met as a family. I think when it comes to mental health care, it is such a difficult system to navigate. It's very difficult to find in-network providers to treat your loved ones. It's very expensive to pay out of pocket, so it's a barrier to many people accessing care. So this idea that they went to bat for you and really called the plan, that's a great story. Not everyone has that experience, but I think it's well worth letting your benefits folks know, and I know plenty of people do, what your experience is, what your needs are, asking if there's some way that the benefits and HR team can be helpful. The other thing some employers do, depending on their size, is there are employee resource groups, what we call ERGs, depending on the size of the organization. And these employee resource groups can come together around topics of interest. So maybe it's mental health. And within that group, if there is an issue with the health benefits plan, which for many there are, to come together and be able to say, hey, we're all experiencing really similar challenges around getting the coverage we need for our loved one. and we want to go to leadership and let them know, or go to HR leadership and let them know, that can be really powerful too. So you're not necessarily going by yourself, because for some people that can feel a little bit intimidating. It sounds like it wasn't for you at all, Nancy, and I applaud you for that. But for many people, it may feel intimidating. So this whole idea that you can come together and go as a group and really address that is really helpful. So I'm just going to go on to...
I just wanted to throw one thing in there. And I know we're talking about flexibility as, you know, whether you're working at home or you're working in the office, but there's really this important component that even if you are bound to your office, there are things that you can only do during working hours. Calling the insurance company, calling providers, you know, sometimes it's a matter of taking people to appointments or whatever it is. But to be able to say to your supervisor and not be questioned, you know, that I need to step away for a half an hour because I know I'm going to be on hold with the insurance company, you know, can someone cover for me, or can I just have that time, you know, whatever it is. So flexibility shouldn't just be seen as in or out of the office.
Right. Absolutely. Can I make one more comment about insurance?
Sure.
There is a national regulation called the Waiver for Disabled Dependent Coverage. And it's a national thing. I learned about it at DBSA, that if you have a child who becomes disabled under the age at which they would go off your health insurance, they can stay on your health insurance as long as they are disabled. And I have used that with both of my children. I think my daughter was 35 when she went off my health insurance. And sometimes I have talked to people about this, and sometimes they say, they'll go to somebody low down in HR and say, I want this, and they'll say, oh, it doesn't exist. Oh, no, someone I know called Blue Cross, and Blue Cross said, oh, it doesn't exist. I said, don't talk to Blue Cross, talk to HR. And so they went to HR, and there is a one-page form. You fill out one side, the provider fills out one side, it's done, and it's Waiver for Disabled Dependent Coverage.
Right. Fantastic. I mean, that's very, very important, especially when it comes to mental health care. Assuming your benefits are available and have an adequate network to address the needs of your family. So that's such a great point. So now we're going to do a little pie in the sky. And we've kind of touched on a lot of different policies and practices, but I'm just really curious about what would be sort of ideal for caregivers when it comes to, or you as a caregiver, when it comes to benefits and policies and practices that employers can provide to employees, to especially when they're serving in a caregiver role. So Helena, I'm going to start with you. Just sort of what's your, you may have had this experience or something you really wish you had had, or you think caregivers would really value having.
Yeah, I tried thinking about this, and I realized that a lot of why I'm so happy and grateful for the practices currently in place is because of my team and the people that I work with and my boss. But I'm well aware that teams can change, bosses can change. So if I did have to point out anything that can enhance that workplace support, it would be to have more concrete policies surrounding, we talked about flexibility or some other ways to show an employee that they're supported. I think that would hugely impact. I don't, in terms of specifics, I think it would be making, again, resources available more easily, maybe confidential therapy, yoga during lunch. I was kind of like specific thinking about examples that would help, or wellness days separate from sick days. Things like that can definitely keep you checked in and invested during times where it might be hard for you to stay focused or when you just need a break. Yeah, we don't have specific policies. It's more just the people that I'm grateful to work with. So I do think that in general, having a bit more structure around support would be good, just in case, you know, my team changes.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, that all these great things are happening because you're surrounded by great people who could potentially leave, and that would really change your experience. Yeah. So I can really see that. And I'm guessing that is true in a number of different organizations. It's really the people and the interaction and the experience. And that can happen where people leave and suddenly the whole employment experience changes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, and I really appreciate your points on wellness and self-care, because I have read many studies about the stress on caregivers, whether a loved one has a mental health condition or any other disability or physical condition, other physical health conditions, that it really can take a toll in terms of stress and a lack of free time and just higher levels of stress in general. So, and frankly, it benefits everyone when employers offer what you describe, wellness days, yoga, stress management, because the reality is what COVID did for all of us is send our stress levels really quite high, regardless of the industry we work in, some more than others. So there's a lot to be said for just really getting serious and doubling down on wellness and stress management and raising resilience now, whether someone serves as a caregiver or not. So everyone can benefit from that. So very, very important. And how about you, Nancy? Use your magic wand. It sounds like you have a lot of great things, but what else would you add if you could?
Well, I just want to talk about a few things that I didn't mention before. Northeastern, like many people, had an employee assistance program. So at one point I did call them when I was just desperate with my son, and who's my second child with the illness. And she was lovely. And she says, I think you're doing everything you can do. I don't have anything else to offer you. But it was just nice to hear that. But I think other people who didn't have my resources, because I had a lot of resources because I had my daughter before I had my son get sick. But I think it would be nice to codify some of those things. Like, my boss really went to bat for me when I took 6 weeks off one summer, and she got me paid for it. I mean, that was really going above and beyond. And it was because I'd been there for several years, and she knew I was capable and effective, and she knew I wasn't I was really falling apart at that point. And actually, I had been depressed a little before that, and I talked to my direct supervisor about it, and I said, look, if I ever get like this again, I want you to tell me, because I don't recognize it till I get pretty deep in. I want you to talk to me about it. So again, I got really deep in, and the second time I got deeper in, and I said to her, why didn't you tell me? And she says, because I didn't know how to say it. Which I thought was really interesting, because I was really close with this woman, and she'd been through some stuff herself. So I just assumed that she would be able to have the conversation with me, and she wasn't. So again, I got deeper in than I had the time before, and everybody supported me to take some time off and get my act together. But again, these are things I found out because I went searching for them. So I think it's a good idea to make things more open and available. And Northeastern, being huge, they do a lot. They offer all kinds of health and wellness programs. They have a gym. They offer yoga. They do everything. But it might be nice to have it a little bit more structured in terms of how you find out about it. And I did find a lot of resources on my own on the outside. And maybe perhaps the EAP folks could have been more knowledgeable. I mean, they were good. Don't get me wrong. They did their best. But it might have been nice if they had a few more ideas that beyond what they already had. Because I think my situation, I don't know if it was unique or not. I really can't say, because I don't know who else called them. But I really, like Helena, I really can't complain. I really had a really positive experience. And just want to put a shout out that if I had not had the employer I did, I could not have done what I did, either professionally or with my family. And I really want to stress that.
Yeah, I think you raised some really good points. Specifically the EAP, they are underused nationally. And not everyone has the same experience with EAP. Some people, the EAP does not necessarily meet their needs. Other people have said it was an absolute route into counseling and very helpful. The other thing that is a big tip for employers is don't forget to remind people about the EAP often, And because what happens in many cases is people learn about the EAP, if they're lucky enough to have one, as part of an onboarding process or during orientation, and they're not reminded about it throughout the year. And ideally, an employee assistance program is there to connect people with counseling, and that can sometimes lead directly to a connection to a mental health clinician, to mental health care and treatment, which is what many people reach out to an EAP for. Again, not everyone has the consistent experience, but employers reminding people often is really, really important. And even doing a joint presentation with the EAP, especially now for many people remain in the virtual environment, doing a joint presentation, HR with the EAP, reminding people what they're there for. It can be a backdoor way in to talk about mental health, stress management, financial issues, legal issues. They can cover a lot. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, on the flip side, Nancy, and to your point, is employers should consider surveying their employees to find out their experiences with the EAP. Has it been effective? What else do they need to be doing? It sounds like you could have used a lot more support. And then also looking at your data as an employer to see how many people are reaching out, and really looking at not just sometimes hits on a website, because some EAPs measure, well, we had this many people access our resources through the website. What you really want to know is how many people were connected with counselors, how many people were connected with support, how many people were connected with care. And then the last thing I'm going to say, I really appreciate, Nancy, what you just shared around your supervisor or boss not knowing what to say. That is not uncommon at all. What we know is that mental health still remains somewhat of a taboo topic for many. We're slowly seeing that change. And I think we're seeing that change because of people like you and Helena, who have been fairly open with colleagues at work and talked about serving as a caregiver, letting other people know. But it's still, we have a ways to go when it comes to mental health. People just get uncomfortable. So the more that employers and organizations make mental health visible, the better. That is really critically important. And we actually have training we do at the center called Notice, Talk, Act at Work. And what we're hearing, it's an e-learning module, so you do it on your computer in your own time. And what we're hearing is that people don't so much have an issue with the notice part. They notice colleagues who are struggling. It's the talk piece. What do I say? How do I say it? How do I check in? How do I lead with empathy, like Helena described in the beginning, with empathy, compassion, understanding? It just makes people nervous and fearful, and they just don't do it. So there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to learn more about what that talk looks like. Because really, it's just a human-to-human connection, as Helena described it earlier. It's the human approach, and it's not rocket science. We all get nervous around mental health, but it is just checking in, saying, "Hey, Darcy, you really don't seem like yourself lately. I'm concerned about you. Do you want to talk about it? Let's see how I can be helpful." It can be as simple as that. You don't have to go to the mental health words if that is something you're uncomfortable with. Sometimes just those words saying, "How can I be helpful? You don't seem like yourself," and sharing what you're observing can make all the difference. So I really appreciate that you brought up the talk, because I think that is a common experience still to this day, even though COVID has made mental health much more visible.
Right. I was going to say, I think there are two things that have really supported the shift in people's willingness to talk. And one is COVID, because it's actually, seen as a real thing now. But the other thing is the younger people coming into the workforce. They've been talking about mental health. I mean, I know that, when my kids were in high school, it was like comparing, who's on what medication or like they were that comfortable with it. So I think that that's a really positive thing for us. I did want to point out one thing that for Families for Depression Awareness, even though our website is currently in transition, we're very excited about what's coming, but it's a little shaky right now. But the one thing that we do really have available is a caregiver stress test. So if you're a caregiver and you want to sort of get a tab on what your level is and get access to some resources, then we're at familyware.org and click on the online tests and tools, and then the caregiver stress test. And it can really help you you go back again another time after you've done some of the stress management kinds of things, and hopefully you'll be seeing a change. And you can also always go to a mental health clinician for support.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because what we sometimes forget is excessive stress leads to burnout, and both excessive stress and burnout can lead to depression, anxiety, substance use, but also high blood pressure. It can impact our heart and the organs of our body. It's a very serious issue. And for employers, I mean, it really does go to a huge distraction and impacts productivity and performance and retention. All key issues right now. So addressing excessive stress, addressing burnout, so that people don't tip into depression, anxiety, substance use. There are people who have those diagnoses and want to remain well and really stay in recovery and continue to do well. But it gets tough when the stress goes up. So
yeah, I mean, and we talk about an ounce of prevention. If you can do things to help people manage their stress, then you will probably be doing things about impacting your healthcare costs, because of your physical and mental health issues.
Yeah. Yep. So before we go to Sean, who's going to field questions, I did want to ask if Helena or Nancy have any just final comments they want to make before we go to questions from those in the audience.
Well, I'll go first, and this is going to sound very bizarre, but I'm going to say it anyway. The best thing that ever happened to me was having loved ones with mental illness. And I know that sounds very strange. And my daughter's psychiatrist said to me, "You don't remember how bad it was." I do very much remember how bad it was. It was very bad. It was very bad. But it transformed me. And some of the things that Helena said exactly apply to me. It totally transformed me, and I would not go back to the person I was before. And if you look at my two loved ones who have bipolar, and each of them went through 5 really bad years. My son was hospitalized 13 times in 5 years. You would not be able to tell what they had gone through. And partly that's them, and partly that's me. Partly that's the healthcare system, and partly it's that my job enabled me to be able to do this.
Wow. That's powerful.
I would kind of piggyback off that and say that it definitely gives a more clear perspective on what's important and what to focus your time on. And on that note, I think that I'm one of those people that's constantly, knowing that you don't always have the right answer, and constantly evolving in how you're caring for people, and maybe there's something better out there and things like that. So I think it's a constant work in progress, but that perspective and that intent is definitely there. So, that's kind of the silver lining, or the kind of positive to kind of carry you forward.
Well, I just wanted to say how impressive it is that you've both had such a positive experience with colleagues, with bosses and supervisors, with the organizations that you've worked for, and what goodwill that creates for you in your experience and in your describing the work that you've done, and how flexible and supportive your workplaces have been. So to all the employers out there, I would say, may you all gain from what you've heard here in understanding the power and importance of supporting employees who are serving as caregivers. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Susan for any final comment before we go to Sean.
My final comment is just I'm really grateful to Nancy and Helena for sharing this with us. They're awesome volunteers for Families for Depression Awareness. If you want to learn more about us, go to familyaware.org. And I'm really glad that we had the chance to work with you all on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Over to you, Sean.
All right, thank you. Oops, let me try that. I'd like to thank our speakers for their great information and insight. And before we go to questions, we'd like to thank the generous support from our sponsors and funders, Takeda and Lundbeck, who have helped make Right Direction possible. We will now take a step in the right direction with our website is right here. Take a rightdirectionforme.com. And please also use Twitter and LinkedIn at us. I'll be answering questions. I'll be giving questions for you guys to answer. So we got a couple questions. I think the first question that we got was really, how do you talk to someone about your needs as a caregiver? Especially how do you approach your manager or HR? And what were some of the strategies that you might have used that were effective in doing that and making sure you could elicit support from them?
Well, I guess I'll start. I kind of walked in the back door. One day I got a phone call at work that my daughter's at school and suicidal. So I bolted. And then over the summer, she was in the hospital twice. And I just happened to mention it to a colleague who mentioned to other colleagues. And so that colleague mentioned it to supervisor. So I didn't actually have the conversation. I went through the back door. And then they came to me and said, how can we help you?
Helena, how about yourself?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I would go to them with a bit of a plan in place, kind of focusing on the way it might impact my work, and just kind of preempting what we said earlier about prevention is better than intervention. So in terms of deliverables or things like that, just kind of hedging it with that to make sure that their expectations are reset. Because, it's not, I am invested, I want to do a good job, and I want them to know that, so that maybe it's helpful to give a better picture of what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. Setting expectations and resetting expectations are really important. Another question that we got, and maybe we can start with you, Helena. Most caregivers are women. How can we use the workplace to build awareness and knowledge skills for men regarding the importance of them providing support to their partner caregiver? For me, and I've talked about how great my team is earlier, most of the people on my team are actually women. We have a couple of men, and it's actually, I think what might be helpful is giving them the same amount of support or curiosity about what's going on in their private lives. For example, if someone's about to have a baby, asking about paternity leave, things like that, to kind of just make them feel that they're allowed to have that kind of support as well. Nancy, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm thinking about that. I think maybe to send out, again, most of my department was women as well, and all my supervisors were women. But I think it might be nice, perhaps for us, we have an academic year. So maybe in the fall when we have our get-together faculty meeting, that perhaps it might be appropriate for the director of the program to say, I just want to catch you up on what we offer and how we work with people. And I want everyone to know that this applies to you. And if you have any needs, whoever you are and whatever your needs are, please come talk to me, and I'll be as supportive as I can for you. So I think just to give that message at the beginning of the year when we all get together, that's what I would suggest.
I think it's a great point. Constantly reminding people of their benefits. I think that's always a good thing. Another question we have is, most small employers don't offer health insurance. So how can the small employer best support caregivers short of providing insurance if they can't afford it, especially in this current economy?
I want to go there. Massachusetts has Mass Health. So every single person in Massachusetts has access to Mass Health. So if the employer can't afford to do this, there is Mass Health. And my daughter has been on Mass Health for many years, and it is a nightmare. It is a total nightmare to get through the system, to get into the system. I can't tell you how many hours she has spent trying to manage the system when they made mistakes. So if you had a person in your HR department or somewhere in your business that understood Mass Health, because everybody in Massachusetts has access to Mass Health, and could actually walk the person through that and perhaps problem solve when they hit glitches, because there will be glitches and it's not easy. So you don't need to offer insurance in Massachusetts. We have Mass Health, and I would just say, please help people to get it.
Helena, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just a quick along those same lines for anybody who is in New York. New York City Health and Hospitals is the safety net public health system. So we see people for whether it's therapy or any kind of visit, regardless of people's ability to pay. So even if you don't have insurance, you can find a provider within our health system, and I'm proud that that's something that I'm a part of. So just wanted to add like an equivalent of that in New York. But I think for smaller employers, I think there's other things you can do, such as adding, you have to look at the full package, like, again, flexibility, we go back to that again, wellness days, things like that to compensate somehow for the lack of insurance.
Okay, well,
I would also say, Sean, I would also say to give space for employees to share their experiences to help other employees. Because if you've already struggled through solving an access to mental health care issue on whatever your insurance is that you have access to through your state or through your spouse or whatever it is, that can help somebody else and maybe save them 3 phone calls. So I think just recognizing that, this is a limitation of your workplace, that you're not able to provide the insurance, but you can foster the conversations that can help people manage under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the only other thing I would say too, Sean, I know there's one more question in the Q&A, but the only other thing I would say is don't forget about connecting as an employer, if you don't have insurance, connecting people to community organizations like Families for Depression Awareness, like NAMI, like Mental Health America, because they are very likely to have other families who have come to them and problem solved. I've been amazed when I was at NAMI at how much people problem solve together in support groups, in meetings they hold with community organizations around, okay, I don't have any insurance, what do I do? And they come together as a community and they say, okay, these are the options. And Nancy mentioned one, and Helena mentioned one, and there are others in other states. So there are organizations out there that are ready to help families, and I think that's a really important thing to not forget. And I see that there's one more question about helping employers understand the difference between mental health, stress, and burnout. And I agree with that. I don't know William, thank you for your excellent questions. I see them in the Q&A box. I think that's such a really good question. And, I think this is going to vary depending on who your employer is and what opportunities you have for communicating the differences, because they are very important differences. And we all have mental health, and we can't forget that. You may have a diagnosis, but we all have mental health, and our mental health goes through various periods throughout our lives. So at some point, we all may need some mental health support. We may lose a loved one, we may lose a job, we may have a diagnosis that we come out of recovery on. I mean, there's just so many variables there. And we need to make sure employers understand that, and that treatment works, and that people need to get treatment if they have a diagnosis. We also can all have stress and burnout, and the response to those is very different. So the question is, how do we help employers understand the difference? Well, as one person, it can be challenging. But if you get together with colleagues and say, I think we as an organization, find your tribe within your workplace if you really care about these issues, and go to HR. If you have a small organization, go to leadership and say, this is an issue that impacts our bottom line costs, it impacts productivity, it impacts performance. I want to work together so that we understand across the organization the difference between these, because this impacts everything about our business in understanding the difference and how they impact how we think, act, and perform at work. So, there's a real business case to be made, and who does it? Because that's, you want to have qualified people who really understand burnout, who really understand stress, who really understand mental health talking to your organization. You don't want just anyone. But there are lots of speakers out there. I've heard them speak. They're amazing. We've done lots of lunch and learns. I'm sure Families for Depression Awareness has done lunch and learns. So invite in speakers. Often we do this for free. Organizations like NAMI and Mental Health America do too. So bring in speakers at lunch. Make sure you invite people, especially in a virtual environment. It makes it a lot easier. So I appreciate that question. I think it's a really solid one. Susan, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I was actually just thinking about the small employers issue. And one of the things that small employers can do is to be aware of what their community health centers are, where are places that people can go when they actually need care. And just being able to support people through that, I think, could be helpful.
I agree. And I think we are almost at the top of the hour. So really want to thank everyone, again, especially Helena, Nancy, and Susan for bringing these two wonderful women to this discussion. I think their contributions have been tremendous. We do a lot of work in this space on these issues, and what they just described is so consistent with what we hear about highly supportive work environments. So thank you so much for sharing your lived experience. Thank you to Families for Depression Awareness for joining us today. And thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. So this will be archived, and we would ask that you please share this when you get the email with your colleagues and with others within your network, because this was a really rich discussion. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.